All right, so we are finally into modern Europe. This is our last video, and we are about ready to end the Cold War and get into what is happening in Europe today. So, France, 1968. They have a revolution, because that's what France does. So after World War II ends, France is obviously wrecked. However, they got helped to rebuild by the Marshall Plan, as we covered in our last video, and they created the Fourth Republic. However, the Fourth Republic is really not doing well. They lost the war in Vietnam. France had originally had control of Vietnam and then lost it during World War II and then tried to regain it immediately afterwards. However, the Viet Minh and Ho Chi Minh had managed to fight them off, and then America gets involved later, but it didn't really look good for the people of France in 1968. In addition, there was just a lot of structural problems and corruption, and so they ditched that and they created the Fifth Republic, and that is currently what France has today. However, they still almost wrecked it. So it created a much, basically the president at the time, his name was Charles de Gaulle, and they had this uprising in 1968 because they didn't believe that the economy was doing that well. And so in the end, de Gaulle actually had to leave the country, but he returned and he managed to create the Fifth Republic, which had a much stronger, almost a dictatorial president over France, and that has managed to survive today. So de Gaulle really saved the French cycle here, as far as making France kind of workable for the next couple of decades. There's this change in technology and science through the brain drain. The brain drain is when the United States is funding so much new technology because of the Cold War that a lot of people are going to be leaving Europe and going over to the United States. You're going to see the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to control world finances and control the really, basically fiscal policy, controlling and curbing those really high highs and the really low lows of the economy worldwide. In the 1970s, worldwide, we're going to see a problem with the Arab-Israeli War of 1973. In that war, the Middle Eastern countries decided to cut off all countries that continue to trade with and support and recognize Israel, which is going to be a massive problem because we get all of our oil, or a huge portion of our oil, from the Middle East. So for us to be cut off from that, both in the United States during President Ford's term, and also in the Great Britain area, that's going to be a massive problem. You're also going to see, with all of the money that's flowing in from the Marshall Plan, that increase in the cradle-to-grave social care, especially when you're talking about the Scandinavian countries with the socialism that exists there today. This happened during the Great Depression, however, much more than we have. You think that the United States might have too much social care today or too big of a safety net. In Europe, it's a much larger safety net, as far as from the moment that you're born to the moment you die, there's always going to be government support. This is slightly curbed in the 1980s with Margaret Thatcher, who's going to stand for the face of conservatism. So I like to think of Margaret Thatcher almost like the female version of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. An important thing, if you get anything out of this video, the most important thing for you to remember in modern Europe is the creation of the European Union. The European Union is the idea that European countries themselves are too small, especially without any colonies, to be able to compete on a world market with the United States and with Russia. So by joining all of the countries together, it almost creates like one mega country that they can use to compete fiscally, technologically, everything, to be able to compete with the other countries. And it also creates a universal system for Europeans to be able to have one form of currency, to be able to travel easily in between different countries. Europe is very small and very close together, so it's a lot easier than it is like in the United States to travel. And that's the creation of the European Union. The Great Britain left in 2020 in this thing called Brexit, the European Union. However, we're going to discuss that in just a second. So the Cold War, when did that collapse? Cold War basically ended about 1990. So it's going to go from 1947 to 1990. Part of the reason that happened is because of Presidents Nixon and then later President Reagan are going to have these policies of realpolitik and détente. Realpolitik is when you are actually talking about your problems and having open communication, and you're not just sitting and basing things off of a fear of the ideological things. Détente is this French word which basically means the lessening of tensions, opening up that barrier. Gorbachev comes into power in the 1980s, and he is going to have two policies as well, and theirs are going to be glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost is going to be the idea of openness for the Russian community who demands more openness, more transparency with its people, and perestroika is restructuring. I don't necessarily know that Gorbachev knew the end result of that, but the people of Russia and the USSR really took upon it of themselves to push the envelope. They were happy with the changes and they didn't want to go back, and so eventually communism fell. And in 1989, that is going to be majorly symbolized by Reagan saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall," and it's the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. So now Russia, or the USSR, is dismantled, and it turns back into Russia, and it is an oligarchy where it's ruled by a head of people who are rich businessmen who are basically controlling Russia. And right now that's going to be through Putin, who is well known to not be the best and to be very corrupt. And in 2016, he invaded the Ukraine. And that is going to be the most major thing that recently happened, because the Ukraine was an independent country. And so a lot of countries are still trying to convince him to recognize the autonomy of the Ukraine. Changes that happen because of the most modern time, and this change, basically the same things that are happening in America are the same things that happen in Europe. You're going to see that rise of feminism, that rise of the counterculture, the hippie movement, a more open freeness with sexuality and with anti-war kind of sentimentality. One of the most famous feminists at the time is going to be Simone de Beauvoir. Yep, mispronounced that one, from France. There's a lot of people who are refugees who are going to be moving to Europe, and this is going to increase in xenophobia, or the purist no immigrant ideology. 2008, there is the housing crash in the United States. This ended up ripple affecting into a lot of other countries in Europe, for Greece specifically, and Greece's economy collapses. However, Greece is a part of the European Union, so the European Union ends up having to shoulder a lot of the load, and this shows the flaws in the European Union, which is partially why Great Britain ended up leaving and Brexit in 2020. 9/11 is going to show the world the dangers of terrorism, and that terroristic fear is going to also translate into Europe. And the last kind of idea is that there is some Yugoslavic wars in the Balkans in the 1990s, where a whole bunch of ethnic groups are going to be fighting each other. And there's still a lot of tension in what used to be Yugoslavia. It got broken up into a whole bunch of different countries, especially with ethnic cleansing with certain groups, the same sort of idea as Hitler and the Jews in World War II. However, NATO has done a really good job at curbing that and trying to break that free. And that is AP European History Review with Miss Clark. Good night and good luck.